This is the tragic story of a Brazilian girl named Eliza, who was kidnapped and held captive by a famous football goalkeeper named Bruno Fernandes Sousa. Eliza refused Bruno's insistence on aborting the baby she was carrying, which led to her being tortured and strangled to death. Bruno and his accomplices were later arrested and convicted of her murder. Eliza's son, Bruninho, never got to meet his mother and currently lives with his grandmother. The story brings attention to the problem of violence directed towards women and the special privileges that famous individuals often enjoy. In August 2022, the Brazilian football player, who had previously refused to pay child support for his son, was arrested following a legal battle. Eliza's lifelong aspiration to leave behind her life as an escort is reignited upon discovering that she is pregnant with a well-known soccer player. She started to hope that everything could change, but unfortunately, he was not ready to assume his responsibilities. To protect his career and reputation, he took a radical decision. On February 22, 1985, Eliza was born. Her father, Luis Carlos Samudio, is an architect, and her mother, Sonia Fatima Silva, is a farmer. Her father was violently abusive towards her mother, which resulted in her often having to stay away from home early on in her life. When Eliza was 6 months old, her mother fled with her, and she ended up living with her. Unfortunately, Sonia did not successfully escape from Luis, and he threatened to kill her if she tried to take their daughter away. Eliza stayed with Sonia until she was 10 years old, and it was at that point that Sonia decided to live with Eliza's stepfather. However, when Luis came back for Eliza after being gone for 1 year, the confrontation turned violent, and Eliza ended up going back to live with her father. During Eliza's teenage years, she experienced a living hell living with her father, who first abused her when she was young. He then proceeded to prostitute her when given the opportunity at 18 years old. Finally finding solace in Sao Paulo, Eliza became a beautiful young woman dreaming of recapturing her modeling career. But when she arrived in this big city, she found herself without resources or support, making it very difficult to make ends meet as an independent model. Undeterred, Eliza tried to launch her career in earnest, only to find herself constantly struggling financially and prostituting herself at the same time. 12 years later, a fateful photo shoot landed her an acting role in a porn movie, which would change everything for Eliza. In order to secure her future, she became a member of the agency of hostesses Sky Events, which specializes in sports events with a focus on football. Through her work, she socialized with numerous professional players and also engaged in prostitution and pornography, attending exclusive parties hosted by prominent figures in the football industry. It was at one of these events in May 2009 that she met Bruno Fernandes Sousa, a highly skilled and sought-after goalkeeper for the prestigious Flamengo team in Rio de Janeiro. Despite his challenging upbringing, which included a father with a history of criminal activity, and a drug-addicted, violent mother, Bruno overcame adversity to establish himself as one of the country's top goalkeepers. However, his reputation was also marked by incidents of violence, reckless behavior, and a proclivity for excessive partying. Following their initial sexual encounter, Eliza informed Bruno that she was pregnant with his child, which he initially denied due to her profession as an escort and porn actress. Despite Lisa's insistence that the child was his and her desire for him to acknowledge it as such, Bruno repeatedly pressured her to have an abortion in order to avoid any potential damage to his reputation and family life. Despite their continued sexual encounters, Bruno remained steadfast in his insistence that he did not want the child. However, the situation eventually took a dark turn. Months later, she still hadn't had an abortion, and Bruno arranged to meet her again, this time in a hotel. The tension rose, and he physically intimidated her again. He threatened to kill her if she didn't take care of the situation by September. However, in October 2009, the young woman was still pregnant, and the pregnancy was advanced. She was now 5 months pregnant, and she continued to pressure Bruno to take responsibility for his child. During this time, she was living in Rio with one of her friends. On October 12, 2009, Bruno contacted her and suggested a meeting to talk and try to find common ground. He picked her up at her friend's house, and once in the car, both remained in their respective positions. As he had repeatedly told her, he did not want the child, and he wanted her to get rid of it, but she adamantly refused. She would keep the child, which was growing inside her and for which she was beginning to feel baby movement. Faced with this new resistance, Bruno then became violent. He pulled out a gun, forced her into a car, and took her to one of his apartments, accompanied by his loyal friend, Luis Enrique Ramau, nicknamed Macarao. The two men then forced her to drink an abortive drink and take sleeping pills. She was held captive for over 12 hours, and when she woke up, they let her go, threatening to kill her if she told anyone. Despite being terrified, she did not allow herself to be intimidated, and she immediately went to the police to file a complaint. It was at this point that the story became public, and the press seized on it. Bruno, the famous goalkeeper for Flamengo, the most beloved club in the country, had allegedly abducted his mistress because she was pregnant and refused to have an abortion. The case gained momentum, and Bruno decided to speak out in the media. He published a statement in which he claimed that Eliza was a prostitute. He had indeed made a mistake and slept with her at a party, but he was not the father of her child. She was a liar who only wanted his money, and he would take steps to prevent her from harming him and his family. To defend herself, Eliza also spoke out in the press, claiming that the child she was carrying was Bruno's and that he had been threatening her for months. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, and the prosecutor ordered tests to determine if Eliza had any remains of abortifacient drugs in her system, as she claimed. Unfortunately, the results took over 9 months to arrive, making it too late to prove her case. In the aftermath of her kidnapping, Eliza requested a protective order as she feared for her life. She had been threatened with death and abducted by Bruno several times before. However, she was only granted a restrictive order, which required the footballer to stay at least 300 meters away from her. She had hoped for more protection, but since she was not Bruno's official companion or mistress, the judge denied her request. On February 10, 2010, nearly 4 months after her kidnapping, Eliza gave birth to a baby boy in Sao Paulo, whom she named Bruninho, which means little Bruno. In the following days, she continued to ask Bruno to acknowledge his paternity, but the goalkeeper refused. Things escalated, and Eliza took legal action to establish paternity and seek child support. Once again, the news hit the press, and scandals began to tarnish the footballer's image. Some of his sponsors withdrew their support and did not want to be associated with him. In the midst of the media storm, he had to find a solution quickly. Despite Eliza's sincere intentions and hopes for everything to work out, she arrived in Rio at the beginning of June with her 4-month-old son and stayed in a hotel paid for by Bruno. On June 4th, Bruno invited her to one of his properties located in a neighboring city, Minas Gerais, but Eliza did not have a car. Bruno assured her that he would send someone to pick her up, and that was the last time her friends heard from her. Despite regularly keeping in touch with her mother and friends, Eliza did not show up on the following days, causing her loved ones to worry and report her disappearance. An anonymous call received by the police on June 24, 2009, revealed that Eliza had been killed, and her body had been hidden on the plum farm in Minas Gerais after her clothes were burned. However, the judge refused to issue a search warrant based on a simple, anonymous declaration. Bruno was a well-liked public figure, and false accusations intended to harm him could affect the police's image. Although the police monitored the property, they could not find concrete evidence until June 26, 2009, when Eliza's son was found with one of Bruno's mistresses, Fernanda Castro, who confessed that Bruno's wife had given her the baby. Following this, the police interrogated Bruno, his wife, and the property's caretaker. Bruno claimed that Eliza had come to his farm to abandon her baby before leaving. The police obtained a warrant to search Bruno's property on June 28, 2009. They found various items belonging to Eliza, including women's clothing, baby items, and a pair of black sandals, a second pair of flat sandals, and sunglasses, which were recognized by Eliza's relatives. The police also found Bruno's Range Rover, which had bloodstains that were later identified as Eliza's. However, the judge refused to issue an arrest warrant against the professional footballer due to lack of concrete evidence. The police needed more evidence and eventually arrested Bruno's young cousin on July 6, 2009, who made shocking revelations under pressure, including his involvement in picking up Eliza and her son on June 4, 2010. Contrary to what she hoped, Bruno had no intention of giving in to the young mother. He had a much darker plan in mind. Remember that Eliza had no car. Bruno had promised to send someone to drive her to his place. It was his faithful friend Luis Henrique Ramau who came to pick her up at her hotel that day. Unfortunately, she didn't know she had just fallen into a deadly trap. In the trunk of the car was Sergio, Bruno's 17-year-old cousin, who was armed. As Eliza got into the car with her 4-month-old son on her lap, he emerged from the trunk and aimed his gun at her. She didn't let him do it and fought back with Sergio, managing to disarm him. However, just as she realized that the gun wasn't loaded, Sergio struck her with several violent blows to the face, causing her to lose consciousness. When she came, she was in one of Bruno's apartments, but he wasn't there. His mistress Fernanda was present, though. While Eliza was being held against her will by Macarao and Sergio, Fernanda was taking care of the little boy. The next day, still being held captive in the apartment, Bruno played a match with his team but oversaw the operations. He was in contact with his friend and cousin by phone, calling them 4 times from the locker room. After the match, Bruno joined his accomplices in the apartment and rewarded them by giving each of them $17. Without delay, the group split into 2 and hit the road towards Minas Gerais. Eliza, the baby, Macarao, and Sergio got into one car, while Bruno and Fernanda got into another. They drove for 7 hours before stopping at a hotel in Cartagena, where they were joined by a man named Jose Lorino, commonly known as Z's, a former policeman who knew Bruno and Macarao since 2000. He acted as an intermediary between Bruno and one of his acquaintances, a guy nicknamed Bola Bola, whose son was passionate about football and dreamed of making a professional career. Bola made a terrible deal with Bruno. He would take care of Eliza, and in exchange, Bruno would help his son make it big in football. Bola was known in the crime world as an expert in body disposal. He was never found. Together, the group went to Bruno's property, which was later searched by the police. Eliza was locked up in a separate room and would stay there for a few days. Meanwhile, Bruno continued his life as if nothing had happened. He even organized a big afternoon barbecue by the pool and invited about 30 people. The guests were instructed not to enter the house and to stay in the garden. However, one of Bruno's friends insisted on entering the house, and he couldn't understand why Bruno categorically refused. So he convinced the security guard, Flavio, to enter inside, and he saw Eliza. He was shocked and urged Bruno's best friend to give up, but things had gone too far. Bruno couldn't turn back, and he had to solve the problem once and for all. On June 10, 2009, after several days of captivity, Sergio and Macarao were tasked with driving Eliza to Bola's place. Meanwhile, Bruno burned Eliza's belongings, then entrusted the baby to Fernanda before taking a plane back to Rio. Eliza was tortured for hours by the killer, begging him to spare her, but to no avail. He finally strangled her in front of Sergio and Macarao. After killing the poor mother, he put her in a black bag, then headed towards a kennel where 4 Rottweilers were located. Sergio reported that he first gave Eliza's hand to his dogs and they ate it. He then gave all the pieces of poor Eliza's body, which was completely devoured by the dogs, and no remains will ever be found. After Sergio's terrible statements, the judge finally issues an arrest warrant against Bruno, his best friend Macarao, and the hitman Bola. On July 8th, Bola is arrested and accused of Eliza's murder. The next day, as the police were about to apprehend Bruno and his best friend, the 2 young men decided to surrender. They are both accompanied by their lawyers. Bruno preferred to surrender himself to avoid, among other things, being handcuffed in front of journalists. With his lawyers, he declares that he had nothing to do with the crime and that his lawyers will prove it. On July 15, 2009, his club Flamengo fired him. The case made headlines, and the police will eventually find Eliza's body, as without her body, there is no proof that she is really dead. The blood traces found in Bruno's Range Rover were too small to testify to a crime. The bones were never found. They found no trace of Eliza, no blood on Bruno's property or in Bola's house, where he was supposed to have remaining pieces of poor Eliza. The only evidence the judge had was the testimony of Bruno's 17-year-old cousin Sergio. On October 29, 2009, Bruno, along with his best friend Macarao, Sergio, hitman Bola, mistress Fernanda, and wife Diana were all implicated in Eliza's murder. On the same day, the results of the analysis conducted on Eliza's blood when she filed a complaint 9 months earlier were conclusive. She had remains of abortive drugs and sleeping pills in her system. Bruno and his wife's lawyers delayed the proceedings by filing numerous injunctions. Sergio, who was a minor at the time of the events and the key witness, reached an agreement with prosecutors and was finally released on August 10, 2012, but he still had to testify against his cousin Bruno. Unfortunately, 12 days after his release from prison, he was murdered. Many believe that Bruno is not responsible for Sergio's murder, as without Sergio's key testimony, there is no concrete evidence against him. I don't know if these rumors are true, but a couple was convicted of Sergio's death. According to the official version, here is what happened that day. On August 21, 2016, Cesario Silva, a 30-year-old waitress, walked to her job in Belo Horizonte. To get there, she crossed the Minislandia neighborhood, as she did every day. As she walked, she was accosted by Sergio, who called her a bombshell and quickly became very heavy and insistent. He tried to touch her, said obscene things to her, and even showed her his private parts. The young waitress continued her journey as best she could, and as she walked away, Sergio told her that if she passed by again the next day, he would do the same to her. In the evening, when she returned from work, Nilsa, who is married, did not tell her husband, but instead told her lover, Alexander. The latter was not a man of good character, having been arrested several times, including for drug trafficking. She informed him of Sergio's whereabouts, but Sergio showed up once again to bother her. Alexander appeared and accused him of being a thief. Sergio didn't have a chance to respond before Alexander pulled out a gun and shot at him. Alexander missed, and Sergio managed to flee. Later, while seeking refuge at a friend's house, he was discovered and chased by the authorities, but ultimately managed to escape. On November 19, 2012, 2 years after Eliza's disappearance, the trial of Bola began and he was found guilty of her murder. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison for the murder and an additional 3 years for concealing her body. On November 24th, the trial of Macarao began and he too was convicted and sentenced to 19 years in prison plus 3 years. Macarao received a reduction of his sentence by 8 years after confessing to his involvement in the crime and designating Bruno as the sponsor who only took Eliza to Bola and did not know she would be killed. While in prison, guards intercepted a letter from Bruno to his best friend, Macarao, asking him to take full responsibility for the crime, as there was too much evidence linking them to the crime. The letter was signed, and 2 experts confirmed it was written by Bruno. On January 15, 2013, Fernanda, Bruno's mistress, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her knowledge of the crime and failure to prevent it. Finally, on March 4, 2013, Bruno's trial began. He continued to deny any involvement in the murder, but while testifying in court, he confessed and expressed remorse. He claimed that Eliza voluntarily came to claim a pension from him, and he agreed to pay her €10,000 per month. He could not afford the full amount and gave her a partial payment, promising to pay the rest later. Eliza wanted the money immediately and met with Bruno at his farm. According to Bruno, there was no argument, and Eliza left with the money. He later learned that Makarov had orchestrated her murder, and while he acknowledged his fault, the court did not believe his version of events. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison in order to pay nearly €115,000 to Eliza's illegitimate son, Bruninho. 4 years later, Bruno was released from prison under conditions. He signed a contract with a second division club. However, he was unable to attend all training sessions due to the regime's restrictions, and his contract was terminated. Eliza's son was placed in a home after her death, and the following day, her father, who had previously abused her, took custody of the child. A legal battle ensued between the two grandparents, and Sonia, Eliza's mother, ultimately won custody of the child due to the grandfather's history of abuse and prostitution of his daughter. DNA tests confirmed the child's paternity. Bruninho lives with his grandmother today and will never have the chance to meet his mother. In 2022, through his grandmother Sonia, Bruninho filed a complaint against his father for non-payment of child support. The judge had sentenced the father to pay child support until the age of 25, which he did not do. As a result, his son and grandmother are demanding nearly €1 million from him. In August 2022, following the complaint for non-payment, he was arrested again by the police. Today, he is currently free. I hope Bruninho is living in a stable and loving environment, despite the legal conflict with a father who does not recognize him. I hope he is growing up well and has a happy life. This tragic story shows how far some people will go to avoid paying child support and protect their reputation and public image, even at the cost of another person's life. Like many Brazilian women, Eliza tried to emancipate herself by becoming a model or by marrying a wealthy man, such as a professional football player. When she found out she was pregnant with a famous footballer, she probably saw the opportunity to become financially secure if Bruno acknowledged the baby and paid child support. She would no longer have financial problems and would not be forced to prostitute herself to survive. On the other hand, Bruno was not happy with this. He refused to support a girl he considered a mere prostitute. It was not because she sold her body that she was a bad person, but to him, she was less than nothing. He did not hesitate to tell the press that she was a prostitute, among many others. He seemed to have no respect for her. Despite his social ascension due to his status as a footballer, Bruno, who was from the favela, thought he could solve Eliza's problem his way. When she refused to have an abortion, he first offered her money, which she refused. He then started threatening her repeatedly, saying things like, "You don't know who I am. I come from the favela. I will kill you. I will throw you anywhere, and no one will know it's me." Unfortunately, that's what happened. From the start, he had planned to make her disappear. He did not want her to harm his public image. The police found numerous MSN conversations on Eliza's computer with her loved ones. She said she was scared, hiding, and that he would eventually kill her. When she left to stay with friends after the attempted forced abortion, Bruno's friends sent her messages trying to locate her. He did everything to make her come to Rio. This case sent shockwaves through Brazilian society, sparking numerous questions and concerns regarding the treatment of violence against women, as well as how athletes and celebrities are handled. The heinous nature of this crime casts a dark shadow over Brazilian football, emphasizing ethical issues and underscoring worries about the privileged treatment that famous athletes receive in the country. In 2017, Bruno's temporary release and attempted return to professional football caused widespread controversy. Several clubs expressed interest in signing him, which drew backlash from both the public and the media. Eliza's tragic death triggered a wave of outrage throughout Brazil, with many protests calling for justice for her and greater attention to the issue of domestic violence, as well as the impunity afforded to celebrities. In summary, the Eliza Samudio case had a major impact on Brazilian society by raising questions about violence against women and the impunity that certain celebrities may benefit from. The case continues to be a subject of discussion and controversy. I must confess that I am also shocked by Bruno's treatment. After being found guilty, he spent only a few years in prison. Today, he is free, but poor Eliza is no longer with us, and her child is an orphan. I hope that, at the very least, you found this video informative. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to follow for more crime stories.